to be before you. For all of you who have already chosen to be supporters, thank you for everything, for every call, for every sign, for every donation, for saying you will vote for me. I really appreciate your confidence and your support. And for all of you who are still considering who to vote for, thank you so much for listening to me here tonight. You know, I think it's our stories who define us. And in the time I have, I want to tell you a few to convince you that I am the right choice for the First Congressional District. In 2002, I stood before you on this stage as a candidate for the United States Senate. And it wasn't an easy year to be opposed to the war, or talking about health care, or eliminating tax loopholes. And while we didn't win that election, I was very privileged to be asked to be the national president of Common Cause, a watchdog organization in Washington. Asked to speak at a United Nations conference with people from all over the world who work for government watchdog groups and talked about transparency and accountability. And I gave what I thought was a brilliant speech about the importance of doing this in Washington at the worst time in our government. And I sat down, and the person who came after me was from South Africa. And he looked at me and he said, "You know, you seem like a nice woman, but the fact is, I've looked at your country as a role model for my entire life. And now I look at America and I think your elections are decided in the courts. You don't seem to care about counting every vote. The fact is your campaign finance system looks like some kind of legalized bribery. Whoever puts in the most controls your public policy. You don't respect what you hear from your own media, and you don't seem to have a fair and open balanced system, and you don't even respect your own constitution or the rule of law. Do you know what people think about your country around the world?" And I stopped and I thought, wow, you know, I didn't vote for the Bush administration. I think I worked for the good guys. But the fact is, our democracy has been dismantled in front of our very eyes. People have lost...
Bring it back! Bring it back!
And I decided I could spend 4 more years in Washington trying to convince our Congress to do the right thing. Or I could stand up here in front of all of you and ask to be one of those people who cast the vote for change. And that's because, like many of you, I believe we should bring the troops home now and end this war that never should have started. And spend that $400 million back here that we spend every day. Spend it back here in America on health care and renewable energy and creating jobs here at home. And it is time to admit that there was a connection between the war and our dependence on foreign oil. And while we need to change this system and impose the windfall profit taxes, we have to admit to ourselves that this is an energy catastrophe. We have to look at this as an opportunity to invest in wind and solar and tidal power right here in Maine and retrofit our old buildings and old houses. And I'll say one thing, I am so tired of every time we bring up the healthcare debate, somebody saying to us, "Well, that's so nice, dear, but how are you going to pay for it?" Well, I want to hear Americans say, how can we afford to keep the broken system that we have? And I don't want to live in a morally bankrupt country that doesn't believe that healthcare is a right for every man, woman, and child. And you know, it's not going to be easy to reverse the work of the Bush administration that bled our economy dry, sent us to war while they cut taxes on the most wealthy. But we need to do that. We need to stop the war, invest in our infrastructure, and pass universal health care if we're ever going to get our economy back in shape. To make a very important decision in this first congressional race on June 10th. And I just want to tell you a few more of my personal stories to see if I can convince you to support me. You know, I can't claim, like some of my opponents, that I was born here in Maine, but I'm very proud of my own background. My grandparents were all Scandinavian immigrants who came to Minnesota looking for a better life. It's the Minnesota crowd. On the Henderson side, my grandfather lost his farm in the Depression, but he worked hard much of his life to get it back. On the Johnson side, my grandfather died young, and my grandmother cleaned office buildings in Minneapolis to support her family. And in fact, my father was sent off to live on another farm because she couldn't support all of her children. My mother was a nurse, my dad was an accountant, I grew up as an anti-war protester in a time when I believed, like many of us did when we were young, that it was our opportunity to stop a war that also should have never been started. Young people helped end that war. You know, I came to Maine as a teenager. I went to College of the Atlantic. I started an organic farm. And one day, one of my neighbors came to me and she said, you know, a lot of women on the island have knit sweaters out of the wool from your sheep. And people are hurting. What if we tried to create some jobs by starting a knitting business? So I took the economy into my own hands. And eventually we had 35 knitters. And then we said, what if we created full-time, year-round jobs? So we had 10 year-round employees and made knitting kits and sold to 1,200 stores around the country. So when I got up in the state legislature and I talked about increasing the minimum wage or the importance of paying the health care benefits of your employees, I could say so from personal experience and say, I'd be embarrassed as an employee to see my family and friends in the community and not be paying a living wage or cover the health care. And that's what social responsibility is. And when I sponsored the Parents of Scholars Bill, I often would say, every woman in this state and many families are just a healthcare crisis or a divorce or a job loss away from needing assistance themselves. And as many of you know, I lost my brother to cancer, and his healthcare crisis left his family without anything. And I've been a single mom, and I know what it is to make ends meet in a difficult situation. So when I sit down with a constituent and talk about difficult economic issues, it's not something I learned, it's something I know from my personal stories and my family and the people who live on my street. When I went to work in Washington, I didn't go to lobby for the insurance companies or the pharmaceutical manufacturers. I went as a citizen lobbyist for Common Cause. And I sat in the offices of Senator Durbin, who will be with us later tonight, and said, you've got to adopt a public financing system just like we have in Maine. And he's the sponsor now. And I talked to Senator Clinton about how our election system works in Maine and why we can't lose another election to a stolen election again in this country. We've got to change that. And I talked with Senator Obama about the ethics bill and said, you're not going to restore the faith in Congress unless you enact tough ethics laws. And it wasn't always easy to talk to members of Congress about all those issues. But if I'm fortunate enough to win, I will hit the ground running as someone who's had those tough conversations and understand how important it is to change. Now I want to tell you one last story before I run out of time. When I got elected in Knox County as a state senator, and many of the people who helped me do that are right here tonight, it was a Republican district. And here's what people said to me. You know, if you want to get re-elected, here's what you've got to do. Some days you vote with labor, some days you vote with business, some days you vote on the environment, some days take the other side. And then nobody will know where you stand, and everybody will always think you're really nice. But I decided that's not how we're supposed to do this. That we should always vote our conscience and do the right thing and stand up for the people we represent. And I can't tell you how many times in the 8 years I've served, people would come up to me at a Rotary Club or somewhere else and say, you know, I don't always agree with you, but I appreciate that you tell the truth and you stand up for your values. Because I think that's what leadership is. It's not something about playing the middle and not letting anyone know where you stand. It's about fighting for what you believe in and being able to convince the people that you represent that this is the right thing to do. And this is our moment to do that. So, if you are willing to choose me to be the first Democratic woman ever elected to higher office, I can promise you, I will always be honest, I will fight for those values that we all share, and I will bring my real life experiences and work just as hard as I have every day of my life to fight for the change we so desperately need. Thank you very much.